When Qui-Gon Jinn was forced to touch down on Tatooine to repair the ship that he and the fugitive Queen Amidala had escaped Naboo in, he was astonished to discover a young slave boy living on the planet who had apparently been conceived by the Force itself. Anakin Skywalker had a higher midichlorian count than even Yoda, and Qui-Gon quickly came to the conclusion that Anakin had to be the chosen one who would bring balance to the Force. Realizing what a huge discovery he had made, Qui-Gon found a way to get Anakin off the planet and back to Coruscant to present him to the Jedi Council. Unfortunately, despite how impressively attuned to the Force he proved himself to be, the Council refused to train Anakin on the basis that he was too old to begin training. Though he wasn't allowed to train Anakin himself, Qui-Gon was undeterred and brought Anakin with him to observe as he and Obi-Wan Kenobi returned to Naboo to aid in the battle against the Trade Federation. Qui-Gon was killed by Darth Maul in the ensuing battle, but Anakin proved himself by piloting a fighter up to the Trade Federation mothership, destroying it, and bringing the Federation troops to their knees. Upon his return to Naboo, Anakin was informed that Obi-Wan had been promoted to the rank of Jedi Knight and would be allowed to take Anakin on as his Padawan apprentice. It was in almost that same moment when Anakin met someone who would become a crucial figure in his life, Chancellor Palpatine. In a chilling moment, the newly minted Chancellor, who was actually the powerful Sith Lord Darth Sidious, gave Anakin a pat on the shoulder and made a passing remark about watching his career with great interest. The discovery of such a pivotal figure as Anakin in such an unlikely place seemed to be an entirely chance-driven event. But was it truly? Is it possible that Palpatine not only planned to subvert Anakin to the Sith cause after he was brought to Coruscant, but was aware of him before even the Jedi were? Palpatine had used the Force to gain incredible foresight into events to come, but could he have known that Anakin would get pulled into the conflict all along before the Jedi ever landed on Tatooine? Let's go through the possibilities raised by this series of events and see what we can piece together. First possibility, Palpatine knew about Anakin and had planned to subvert him from the beginning. Palpatine approached his rise to power like a decades-long chess game and always seemed to be a step ahead of the Jedi the entire time. In fact, he usually manipulated the conditions in any given scenario specifically to push the Jedi into actions that would benefit him in the long run. That being the case, it's definitely possible that Palpatine knew full well about Anakin and specifically planned for the Jedi to find him on Tatooine during their escape from Naboo. But why would Palpatine want the Jedi to find and train Anakin instead of doing so himself? Wouldn't he want to raise Anakin and teach him the ways of the Sith from an early age, instead of having to go to the trouble of letting him fall into the hands of the Jedi and later have to work to re-educate him? Well, maybe not, because Palpatine needed to let Anakin think turning to the dark side was his decision, and not something he was manipulated into. If you watch the history between Anakin and Palpatine, you see that Palpatine became a sort of unofficial mentor to whom Anakin could come for guidance on matters he didn't feel like he could speak to the Jedi about. Palpatine took every one of those conversations as an opportunity to sow the seeds of doubt in Anakin's mind about the intentions of the Jedi and the way they felt about him. He actually convinced Anakin that the Jedi were out to take control of the Senate and were hiding their plan from him the entire time, and Anakin believed him. Palpatine didn't care if the Jedi taught Anakin the ways of the Force or how to handle himself with a lightsaber. In fact, they did him a favor by doing so because it was one less thing he'd have to personally do when Anakin became his apprentice. All he cared about was letting Anakin become disgruntled enough with the stringent Jedi ways that he'd end up deciding the right thing to do would be to destroy them all, which he eventually did. Now let's also consider the idea that Palpatine had no idea about Anakin, but was more than happy to take advantage of the situation once the Jedi found him. See, Anakin's discovery really could have been a happy accident, and any plans that either the Jedi or Palpatine devised for him came after the fact. Now, if that's the case, then that would have meant we saw a major revision of Palpatine's original strategy in the wake of the events of the Phantom Menace. If Palpatine had no idea about Anakin until the Jedi brought him to Coruscant, then it's easy to see how he threw whatever existing plans he had out the window. His previous apprentices had their uses. Maul was a powerful fighter, Dooku was a charismatic leader for the Separatists, but neither of them had what Palpatine needed in an apprentice for the long haul. However, each of their lives as Sith Lords may have played out very differently if Palpatine had never discovered Anakin. But did Palpatine decide to change course as soon as he met Anakin, or did it take time for him to commit to the youngster? See, Palpatine could see Anakin's potential as soon as he met him, but he had a lot on the line and couldn't make a snap decision on the spot. Part of the reason he mentored him for so many years was to influence him away from the Jedi, but he also needed to watch Anakin and make sure he would learn to harness his power. Anakin would need to prove himself to Palpatine before he was willing to put all his chips in on him. In fact, it's likely that Palpatine didn't decide for sure until the final confrontation between Anakin and Dooku. You need a certain mentality to succeed as a Sith Lord, and while Anakin definitely had the power, Palpatine wouldn't have been certain he could let himself unleash his darker emotions until he saw Anakin kill a defenseless Dooku in cold blood right in front of him. Once he did, Palpatine's decision was made, and he revealed himself, tipping off the series of events that led to the destruction of the Jedi and Anakin's transformation into Darth Vader. Another possibility is that Palpatine not only knew about Anakin, but actually had a hand in creating him. So Palpatine revealed a lot more about himself in Revenge of the Sith than we had been privy to in the 5 previous movies. One of the most interesting things we learned was the tale of Darth Plagueis the Wise, and how he lost his power when he was betrayed by his apprentice, who we know to be Palpatine himself. Though the focus of the story was on Plagueis' ability to prevent others from dying, Palpatine also mentioned that Plagueis, who had taught his apprentice everything he knew by the way, was able to manipulate the Force to create life. This raises the possibility that Palpatine knew all about Anakin from the time of his conception because he had created him, or at the very least he was involved when Darth Plagueis created him. While the Jedi were so tied up looking at Anakin's existence as a Force-driven immaculate conception, the reality could be that Plagueis and/or Palpatine had used the dark side ability to create life, and were the ones directly responsible for Anakin even existing in the first place. Now, if you doubt that, ask yourself how many other Jedi we ever met who were literally conceived by the Force. Anakin's the only one, and the odds of him being the only case of the Force manifesting itself in this way seem a little too slim unless there was something, or someone, manipulating the system. Given what we know about Palpatine and Plagueis, and Palpatine's way of dropping subtle hints into his words, it starts to look a lot like Palpatine was indirectly telling Anakin exactly where he came from. Now, regardless of when Palpatine discovered Anakin, the next question is what exactly Palpatine's plans for him were. Anakin had grown to become a phenomenally powerful man, but also one who was prone to making rash decisions and relying on the Force to get him out of trouble most other Jedi would be too smart to get into in the first place. There were pluses and minuses to Anakin that would have landed him in 2 likely scenarios once he fell under Palpatine's sway. One is that Palpatine planned for Anakin to become his successor as the ultimate Sith Lord. Now, Palpatine had shown himself time and time again to be a man who coveted power above all else, and would stop at nothing to gain more. However, during his duel with Yoda, Palpatine said it wouldn't matter which of them won, because Darth Vader would become more powerful than either of them. That seems like an odd statement from a man who sought to bend everyone else in the galaxy to his will. So is it possible that Palpatine really did plan for Vader to surpass him and become the ultimate unstoppable Sith Lord one day? Well, if you look at the history of the Sith, the idea of Vader killing Palpatine and usurping him to take control of the Sith Order himself falls pretty neatly in line with such successions in the past. In fact, nearly every Sith Lord in history became the Sith Master by killing their own master, and then chose an apprentice that they thought had the potential to one day destroy them and take control. That's literally how the Sith Order grew in power over the 1,000 years during which the Jedi had thought them extinct. Until then, the two played a game where both knew the other wanted them dead, and either the apprentice would become powerful enough to destroy their own master, or they would die trying. Before his defeat to Obi-Wan, there's no doubt that Anakin could have one day become powerful enough to destroy the Emperor. Once he became dependent on his life support suit, however, all it would take would be a powerful torrent of Sith lightning to destroy the mechanism that kept him breathing. If Vader could find another way to destroy the Emperor without dying in the process, then so be it. But until then, Sith tradition dictated that the Emperor keep Vader under his thumb for as long as possible. Which brings us to our other possibility, which is that he planned to make Anakin his slave, use him as a tool, and nothing more. To put it bluntly, Palpatine was a power-mad dictator who would stop at nothing to claim the power he craved. We're talking about a guy who instigated a civil war that he directly controlled both sides of, specifically to create a need for him to be granted unlimited executive powers that could never be taken away. Nothing would stand in Palpatine's way, and he was not at all adverse to sacrificing a pawn or two if it moved him closer to his goals. History bears this out. He sacrificed Darth Maul to draw the Jedi out and put a scare in them by letting them know that the Sith were still out there and a threat to them. He then sacrificed Count Dooku to give Anakin a taste of the power of the dark side and push him further down the path that would eventually lead to his transformation into Darth Vader. Years later, Palpatine was even ready to sacrifice Vader as well after Luke defeated him on the Death Star so he could take Luke on as his new apprentice. You can look at Palpatine's track record and see pretty clearly that he regarded others as little more than tools to use to his own ends. Palpatine would have sensed Anakin's strength with the Force the moment he met him, and it would be very much in character if he merely saw Anakin as another such implement that he could use when the time was right. Once Anakin was maimed at the hands of Obi-Wan Kenobi and was forced to rely on the life support suit, he became even more Palpatine's slave, knowing that he could never survive without the help of the man he now called Master. Thanks for watching this video, and as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please leave them in the comments section below, and your opinion on what Palpatine knew and when, and what his plans for Anakin really were. If you'd like to support the Star Wars Wavelength channel, please click subscribe so you can check back in whenever new videos are posted. Thanks again for watching, and may the Force be with you. Always.